Brazilian Raintree is a species that I really like for bonsai, and this one I've grown from seed. In this video a little bit more about Brazilian Raintree. Why is it so great for bonsai? What are the drawbacks for bonsai in the Brazilian Raintree? How do you care for it, and particularly how do you care for it in a temperate climate like mine, so where the winters get cold and you can't keep it outside? Because this is a tropical species, they don't do really well. How do you propagate the Brazilian Raintree? What are the pitfalls when you're growing this? And I will prune it back, I will take cuttings. Yes, that's one of the propagation methods, and I am actually thinking about repotting it right now. Yes, right now in the middle of summer, and I'll cover that as well. When to repot and why then. Welcome, this is Jelle with the Brazilian Raintree. About the Brazilian Raintree. This tree I grew from a seed over the last 7 or 8 years. I was lucky enough to get a handful of Brazilian Raintree seeds, and I grew these out into this plant. Now they are very easy to grow. All you need to know is that you need to take a little bit of sanding paper and sand a little bit of the side of the seeds. If you do that, then water can penetrate the seed more easily and they germinate. And yeah, this is what you can get over a couple of years. This of course has been pruned multiple times. This has been repotted multiple times, and actually for the last 2 or 3 years it has been in this pot. It hasn't been repotted, no root work has been done. Now why do I think Brazilian Raintrees are really cool for bonsai? Well, one thing that is very obvious is the leaves. These leaves are double compound. So this is not a branch, but this is one leaf. And what you can see is this one leaf has a central vein and side veins, and on that is where the little leaflets are. So a normal compound leaf would just be like this. A double compound leaf is like this. But these tiny little leaflets that are on there make it look like it is a tree with very many very small leaves, whereas in fact it's actually just very big leaves with holes in them. On top of that, it is really nice because it grows quite easily. Everything that you see here with leaves on it, this has grown over this growing season. And that's in my temperate climate up north, right? I'm not in the tropics. It grows fast, it likes water, it likes warm temperatures, not heat. It likes a lot of light, but direct sun is not per se needed, so you can just put it in a sheltered spot of your garden where it gets a few hours of sun during the day, and you just water it as much as you want, as long as the soil is open and it drains well. So those are really good sides of the Raintree. Another thing that I really like about the Raintree is something that you can see here down below at the root base. And no, I don't mean the calcium deposit here on the bark. I am referring to this. The bark naturally peels. Now this is not such a nice example, but normally when it peels, the bark gets a different color. So it's a lot lighter than the original bark. And actually it's been so wet that underneath it new roots had already started to form. So it's good that I take the bark off. But this exfoliation means that you get a mottled pattern on the bark over the years. Downside of course of this growth is that you need to prune lots. Now this is the biggest downside I find of the Brazilian Raintree. These are not side branches, these are thorns. And the thorns are sharp and very strong. So I always, when I see them, clip them off, otherwise I'm going to cut myself. If you cut off anything that is bigger than this, you get a scar, you get a wound, and the wounds, they don't close all that well. So if you need to make a trunk chop, you get scars. Here is one of those scars on the trunk of a cut that I made a few years ago, right there, and it still hasn't closed. There's a small one here and there's a small one there. And in fact there's going to be a very big one in spring because I'm going to cut the tree down quite a lot, and I'll tell you in a minute why. It's therefore important to know how to prune them to not get big scars. And the way that I do it, I leave a stump. This was pruned earlier this year, and now I can prune it flush with the branch. Now it will close over, but if you do this straight away, there's a big risk of it drying into the branch and you get a dead section. And similarly for taking off bigger branches, I always leave a stump that can then dry in, and then you remove it flush when it is all brown and the bark has started to clearly swell around the branch. Now this is just one type of Brazilian Raintree. There is a second type. That one doesn't have any thorns. However, the leaves are much bigger. The branches extend a lot more. It is a lot coarser to work with. And therefore, for me, I prefer this one over the other one. The other one is hard to get ramified. This ramifies really well. Now, a final characteristic that I really like about the Raintree is that the branches have a tendency to grow outwards rather than upwards. Like this one has not been wired and is pretty much completely horizontal. If you look at the tree, you see these little layers appear. What you also might notice is that some of the leaves have folded close, and that's a natural response for a Raintree. If something changes in the environment, it gets darker for night or a rainstorm, it folds its leaves together and it drops the leaves and it has them hanging down a little bit. Now, a big downside of Brazilian Raintree is also they do not like change. So if you take this from the outside and you put it back inside, chances are a lot of the leaves are going to turn yellow and drop, and it might take a couple of weeks or maybe even 2 or 3 months before the tree all of a sudden starts growing again. In the middle of winter, for me, it's quite normal to have this tree bare for 1 or 2 months. So don't be concerned if the Raintree drops the leaves. Just keep the soil evenly moist, not soggy, and wait. At some point when the light intensity increases, so after the middle of winter, you will very quickly see the tree starting to sprout. For me, normally January, February are the bare months, and then in end of February, all of a sudden they start sprouting again. Let's look a little bit at the design of this tree. You can see it comes out of the ground. It has a fairly good base, and under the soil there's a much better nebari hidden, I'm sure. Well, actually I am sure because I created it myself. There is a nice nebari hidden. There's lots of movement in this trunk, and no matter which side you take as a front, the trunk has nice curvature. If you look from this side, which right now would be the front, you see that all the branches except for this one are actually pointing backwards. This is, however, the front because the top of the tree, the apex, is really on this side of the tree. Otherwise the tree would be leaning backwards from me. So I'm going to repot and I'm going to look for an option to plant it at a different angle. And why do I want to do it? Well, if I flip the tree around, the trunk very clearly walks away from me. So the apex is behind the trunk. I don't want that. I want it like this. And if I do that, then I can open up the branches here a little bit, but all the branches, because they were going backwards from the other side, from this side, all the branches come forward. And that is ideally what we want. We want a tree that embraces us as we look at it. Now, one thing to emphasize this as a front would be to take this very long branch here that comes straight towards you and remove that. It's a bit of a risk because if I can't tilt it, then this might not be the front, but I am going to just do it. This is a nice branch to see whether I can take some cuttings off. So this one, I'm just going to plop in some water for later. Now I'm going to leave this on because I like the character, but this I'm also going to reduce so that this branch is not coming forward so much. The same here. All these branches that now come towards the viewer needs to be shortened or removed. I'm just going to shorten them because I'm going to shorten a lot of this tree. And maybe eventually I will use this as the back again. But this way I can now go through the whole tree and say, well, I'm going to shorten all this long extension from this here. Now what this does, it will trigger the tree into growing new branches. On top of that, because I'm going to repot today, there will be less foliage to support for the tree, which is quite beneficial. I increase taper and movement in the branches by doing this. After all, I'm removing length, therefore there's a hard cut and a young thin branch will come out. Not a nice one for cutting. I'm not going to take too many cuttings, but I'm going to take some because people have been asking me for cuttings. So let me talk a little bit about propagation of this tree. Now, Brazilian Raintree can be propagated very, very easily. They grow from seed, as mentioned before. They do air layer really well, and they also propagate from cuttings very, very easily. In fact, I have one that I propagated from a cutting, this one, and a few days ago I decided that I'm going to take the sacrifice branch off and air layer that as a new bonsai. I don't know why in Europe they are quite rare. In the US I know that in Florida they're propagated quite extensively and they're quite easy to get a hold of. But in Europe I've not found any commercial trader that grows these in large volumes and sells them. Now what you must notice when you're pruning these, You see here this long straight section with no leaves, no thorns, nothing. This is of course an internode. There's no branches ever going to grow here. So if you cut here, then we'll die back up to there. So there's a bud here and that can grow. So always keep that in mind. I always leave half a centimeter or so from the bud and then I clip. This is going to be shorter, just like that. Now, as we were talking the design, I'm meanwhile pruning this tree so that you actually see how I prune it in practice. And you see the structure of the trunk and the tree come out. And what you might notice now that you have a clear view of this tree is that right here, there's a sort of a split here. The main trunk curves and goes back to this direction with these very long whips here. But there's a branch here that sits as a side branch awkwardly in this curve. So now the first idea that I had was I'm just going to cut it off right here, just above that little side branch that sits there. Then I was thinking, if I want to flip the tree around, then this might actually make a new top. And then I would air layer this whole section off. Now I am going to repot this year. I'm going to repot today actually, because it wasn't growing as strong as I'd hoped. But this is what I'm going to do. This is going to be my new top. So I need to plant it in, that new top actually works. Like this. And then in spring or in summer next year, I'm going to air layer this section off. So what I can do now already, say, well, if I'm going to air layer, then this branch should go completely. Just like that. That gives it space for me to put an air layer on in here in this area. It also allows this tree to grow up. You can wire out Brazilian rain trees quite well. So I'm going to wire this as well. But here on top, if I'm going to air layer, I need to check what am I going to keep. And it's a bit of a tricky question, because if you look here, you have a branch in the back. There's another branch around the curve, and there's this big branch. It comes up. I actually like an acute curve. Here's an acute bend, there's an acute bend, and then this could remain the top. That would mean for this tree that this is not needed, and I can actually just remove this branch. Now you get a much better view here on what's happening. This could also make an interesting top, but this curve is really awkward. So I could keep this as a side branch, but I'll make it shorter. And this one I'm going to remove pretty much completely. Just like that. And now I've actually created quite a nice clear view for this trunk line to follow. This of course needs to be cut flush. This needs to be cut flush, but I'll do that next year. After I've propagated it, then I'll clean it all up. So I'm going to air layer it at this point, where this very nice curve is taking place. This I will keep for now, because it will just aid in developing the lower base. Here are two branches pretty much opposite. Considering that I have this one, then I want one on the other side of the trunk, and I can remove this small one here. This is so small, I just cut it flush with the trunk. So the tree is getting a lot smaller already. Here at the base we see a couple of branches that are really interfering with each other. I'm going to clean that out by taking out one side branch that is really overpowering this. Then there's this long side branch from the left that also is interfering. Then I'll reduce this to 2 buds. I'll reduce this to a few buds. This gets really long. Let me just cut it back. Now this is nice open pad. This looks dead. This looks dead. This is now too long. Too long. And this is how I go through the whole tree, making sure it fits again. Right. This is actually this year's growth, an ideal cutting. Propagation of Brazilian Raintree is actually quite simple as well. You can grow them from seed. The main plant was grown from seed. You can do an air layer. But you can of course also root cuttings very well. So now what I do, I just take a very fine grained substrate. I punch a bunch of holes in there, and then I just take this year's growth. So this really shouldn't be complex. Just take a healthy branch of this year. I like to remove the thorns from them, take away most of the leaves. You don't need a lot of leaves to get roots actually on these, because it is nice and warm. Everything will root really quickly. And I just punch them in there. You can of course, just to be sure, leave them sit on the bench for a little bit so that the rooting hormone can better interact with the cambium and get drawn in. But for Brazilian Raintree, these roots so easily. And that really is also why I am surprised that there's no big propagation taking place on the European mainland of this species. It is such a great species for bonsai. And in a good summer, this can get me 80 or 90% roots. On the bad summer, it can also be 0 roots, right? If it is too cold, these don't root all that well. It is a tropical species after all. Now it's just a matter of watering it down. You can see I've taken the strongest cuttings, so I take the thicker branches of this year, and you can recognize that it is this year because it has a leaf at every single node. This is growth of this year. If it doesn't have any leaves at each node, then it is last year or the year before. And once this is all watered down, I am using these plastic baggies. I just get them online, and I slide the whole thing in there, and then I just put it in a position where it doesn't get direct sun for more than half an hour or so in the morning, and just let it sit. And after 2-3 weeks, I'll open it up, I'll ventilate it a little bit, I'll remove the things that are moldy, and then I might water it, let it drip out again, and plant it back into the baggie until I notice little roots coming out at the bottom or new growth starting, and then I start opening it up. Really doesn't have to be more complex than that. Don't drop them on the ground if you're walking barefoot. Drop them in the bin. Let's not overcomplicate things. Don't think there's all that many roots stuck to the side here. Well, very wet organic sludge. But nice healthy roots at the bottom, that's a good sign. Let's get most of this off. I'll show you the nebari and I'll show you the roots. Right, the root ball has been severely reduced. As said, this is going to be my future apex. So this is roughly the front of the tree. Planted up like this works really well. Also here, this is a nice big root spread that is already starting to push. Repeated pruning of this root base has created quite a nice broad spread here. And here you see really how nice this root base has developed and how it has spread out. But also on this side there's just not a lot of roots. It never sprouted any roots on this side. And I've covered that up by moving a root here along the base. Maybe over time that it will fuse. Or I prune it off and I graft a new root in. But for now I'm going to use these nice happy roots that are growing here to get it anchored into the pot. I'm going to use a fairly open substrate, but I remembered again what I did. I put a lot of potting soil in this mix because this sits indoor for most of winter in a heated room, and then it dries out very quickly. Now I just need to put this back in the garden, give it lots of water, and in fact, looks like the weather gods are with us. starting to rain. So this goes back into the rain. Of course I'll water it first, but this will recover just as it is. It just goes back to its normal spot where it gets 4 or 5 hours of sunlight during the day. I'll water it as normal. It should recover very, very quickly. It is warm, it's the middle of summer, everything is growing, and this tree is going to push very quickly now.